Hello everybody, it is Ebontis, and I want to talk to you guys about shipbuilding because I've had a lot of time experimenting, tinkering, and kind of learning some of the nuances to it. And my goal isn't to show you how to build the most aesthetically cool ship. I'm going to let you guys tinker with all of that stuff. I just want you to understand how the systems work, how certain things can affect other things, what skills you might need, how jumping around space can actually affect all of that. So I want to cover the basics first with skills, jumping around systems, where you can get all these parts, and then we'll go into the details of what parts affect what, and we're just going to build a basic ship from literally the ground floor up. So first, skills. So when it comes to skills, you need two main skills to be able to access all the parts in the game, and also to be able to fly all the ships in the game. One is piloting. The biggest two is being able to pilot Class B and Class C ships. This allows you to also be able to use those parts when you're building a ship. Now, to be able to have a Class B ship when you're building, you have to have a Class B reactor to be able to use Class B parts. Same thing with Class C. You need a Class C reactor, which is more expensive, so this is why this gets very late game, to be able to use Class C parts. But also, you can buy Class C ships. Maybe there's just one you find that's well put together and you're like, I'm good, I'll just buy this one. You still have to have this to be able to pilot it. So whatever their reactor class is the class of the ship, and if it's better than your piloting skill, you may not be able to use it. It's really unfortunate if you find a cool ship, lands on a planet, you go inside, you break the lock, you clear out the entire crew, and then you go to pilot the ship and it says you can't because your piloting skill isn't high enough. Had that happen, kind of a bummer, so one I recommend maxing out. The other one, Starship Design. Very simple, it just allows you to use cooler and cooler parts, more experimental, stuff that might be like, there might be something that's not as expensive or just about as expensive, but just because it's like a cool like a rank 3, Starship Design module, it may have a better functionality at kind of a similar price point. And that's going to happen all over the place. Some cool stuff here, some nice price value here, just different things you wouldn't have access to otherwise. So if you're going into shipbuilding, you kind of got to get this thing maxed out at some point as well. So those are the main two skills. I mean, whether it's payloads, engine systems, shields, targeting controls, this is important if you want to board a ship. But then you've got Starship Engineering for repairs, then it's all your weapon stuff through here. That's all fine, but if you want to build a cool ship, whether it functions well or not, building it takes those main two. Now, the next thing to talk about is when you are jumping between systems. If I select any system, there are two things that are going to matter. It is my fuel consumption. That is how far I can go. So like this is 19.07, but if I want to jump really far out here, for example, that is going to be out of my fuel range. Just a little bit, but it technically is out of my fuel range if I'm going to jump here. And again, the way the map is set up, it's not always clear, like what's close enough versus what's not. Like this is 251 away, and then this one is 229 away. But then this one here is 302, and yet these two are farther. The map isn't always perfect, so you just got to figure out which system you're going to and go from there. But that whole fuel consumption is based on your fuel tank. So the bigger the fuel capacity you have on your ship, the farther you can go in one single basically loading screen. So if I really wanted to go all the way out here through all these different points, I would need a fuel capacity of 550 to be able to cover this. I don't have that on this ship, but that's something I could probably upgrade to. And that would allow me to make this in one jump. Now the other thing is my jump range on my ship. Currently it's 29 light years. And what that means is that's going to determine how far between one planet and another you can travel. And again, as you can see, the map is not perfectly skewed. It's probably very weird, and you kind of like shift back and forth. Some things move and some don't. So there may be something that's like these two planets may not look that far apart, but maybe they're like 40 light years apart, and you need a stronger gravity drive just to be able to go between this one and this one. You might have 500 fuel, but then you might not be able to get there because that's a gravity drive situation. That's more of a very late game thing when it actually points you to do that, but that is one of those things to understand. So if you're doing a lot of exploring around the main systems and you're like, I just don't want to like, jump to here and then here and then here, and then when I come back, go here, here, and here every time, upgrading the fuel tank, very simple to do, and will make your kind of running around the main area much easier. Now the final thing is most of the places with the little city icon on it, you will have a Starship kind of vendor guy. He's going to help you repair, he's going to help you like build stuff. Now there are certain ones, like this guy, who have access to a set products. He's got like Nova Galactic, he's got Deimos. But there's also certain specialized pieces that you can get in certain places. Say we go to Sol, for example. Nova Galactic. Guess what they sell? Nova Galactic parts. Same with Deimos down here. And then if you travel up to the Narian system, which I don't have it unlocked right now, or I haven't been there in this save because I've messed around with so many different saves, this is Stroud Eklund. Stroud is part of Constellation. He's one of these guys. He's got a whole company. If you go all the way down here to Volley in Neon, there's the Taya, I think is what it's called, Industries. And then if you go into Neon, and then you go into like Ryujin Tower, and you go to like the second floor, there's a whole shipbuilding group that's in there too. And you can mess with the ship, you can build your ship, you can change the parts out, maybe buy some ships from them too. So there are vendors all over the place. There's probably a list on a website and a guide somewhere. That's not the goal, but I just want to explain to you that there are different parts in different places. Somewhere like the Den. In the Wolf system, you should probably know this one. You can go to the Crimson Fleet in the Key, and you can obviously sell contraband there if you can get there. But also the Den is kind of a neutral spot. They have a mix of parts, so you'll kind of have a couple different things from each type of place. But you'll also be able to buy like shielded cargo, so you have a chance at not getting your contraband confiscated if you can pass the scan. There's shield jammers you can get in a couple of places and stuff like that, but the Den is kind of neutral ground, so that means they also have a good mix of parts. But right here at our guy, we've got a couple options. One, if you're ever in combat and you can land at one of these places, pay one of these guys 1,000 credits, your ship will be good to go, no big deal. Now, if you want to build ships from, or buy ships from them, you can, but remember the class of your piloting license per se is going to determine which ships you can buy, but we're here to modify your ships. That's the goal. Now, I've got a couple ships that I've bought. The Razor Leaf you can earn from the Mantis quest, which is a pretty cool one to earn. It's not a bad little one to jump around with, but this is kind of what I've tinkered with. I feel like in my head it looks like a Stegosaurus. Like, you can call it whatever you want. It looks a little goofy though, but it functions, so it gets the job done for me for now. Now you can do this in two ways. You can go for the full builder, which we'll do in a second, or you can just go to the upgrades. And that's these right here. So it's going to go between engines, kind of my main weapons, reactor, grav drive, shields, just some basic pieces. So if you want to just like, hey, I need to upgrade my grav drive like right now, this might be an easy way to go in. Now for the ones that I have available, that's just kind of what I've got access to. It's a lot easier to go into the builder because this thing doesn't seem to have every option that you're possibly going to have. It's even just like an upgrade within the same family. Notice how I've got the 3000 reactor. So if I go in here, I've only got the 2000, the 2020, and the others. So it's within the same specific family if you just want to do a very inline upgrade without very minimal changes. But if you want to go into the bigger stuff, now we go into the shipbuilder. And the shipbuilder lets you do a ton of things. It really does. You can pull a piece off. Like maybe you get a ship from a quest, which you will do this sometimes, and maybe it's going to give you an engine that has Starship Design rank 3. That's kind of a cool thing. But maybe you don't have Starship Design 3 rank as a skill. Well, you can still modify this ship and then keep the engines as something you can use, even though you don't have the skill. So if you get a ship from somewhere else and as a ship part that you can't use, you can still like move it around and still keep it on the ship even though you don't have the skill for it. It's the piloting that you can't actually drive a ship that is like class C if you can only get to class A. But if the part's like, you know, attached to what you've already got already, as long as you don't just straight up bring it out here and delete it, make sure you undo it if you do, but as long as you don't delete it, you can still use the part. So that's kind of a nice thing to know. Now, one word of advice before we build this thing from the ground up, if you're going to go for coloring or you want to do anything, if you have parts that are connected, so say I've got this part and this part, if you double click, it's anything that is connected and then you move it around as a group. And then if you double click it and you want to duplicate it, you can't duplicate a grouping, but you can duplicate a single part. So hover over that one and make another. So duplication should generally work, but for now, that's one of the pieces. You can move things around as a group is all I'm saying. And then also, if you're going to color your ship, please do it as one. I did this one by one by one by one piece. Really annoying. So if you want to color your whole ship, take your main color. Maybe I want to make it bright yellow. Very bright and vibrant. And then for my off color, I want to do like a deep blue maybe. A little saturation, a little bit of darkness here. And then a little bit more blue. And then you want to just go absolutely crazy pink. You can. And you can make it whatever you want, and guess what? If you don't like it, just undo it. But yeah, double click, color the whole ship at once. Now you can tinker with one part at a time if you want like a purple engine, but if you're gonna paint the whole ship, don't do it piece by piece. But for now, let's start from the ground up. Now, as I said from the ground up, I really am gonna try and do that with you guys. So the first thing you need to do is if you are on the ground floor, you are on the ground and you need to walk into your ship, you need a landing bay, which means you need to be able to walk into your ship. Very simple. This place has 2 different landing bays, and you've got that one, and then I've got the Deimos guy. That's basically the two. More of a cosmetic thing than anything else in how this is going to pan out. But overall, those are your two. Going to be very simple. When you go in, they're both going to have a ladder that goes up to the section above. And that's why you'll see the little arrow kind of pointing to what it's going to. We're just going to keep this main normal looking guy. Now, that is how you get into your ship. And you have to have a landing bay, and you get into it from the ground level. If you are in space, you need a docking module. Now, you can have a docking module that looks like one of these, where it is something that will sit up on a platform somewhere, and you'll this has to be the highest part of the ship. And the main thing to know about a docking module is this little rotating ring has to be the farthest point out from where it is pointing. So if it's up high, this needs to be the highest point on my ship. But if I bring this thing down a few levels, and I attach it here and I flip it, which I can't do on this one. So let's try a different one. Now I can flip this one upside down. I can't flip this one. It only works one way, but this will flip to a bottom. So now if I go bottom and I attach this here, now if I am in space and you look at this, I'm literally on ground level 0. That little ring is below the ground level. So that means this landing bay, when I get landing gear on this thing, this is always going to be the farthest point from the bottom of my ship. So the only thing I have to do at that point is dock on the bottom. This gives you some nice freedom when you're building. So if you ever want to change, because the default docking module is like one of these that's up here. And that means that can only be the top of your ship. You can't go higher. But if it's down here, you can actually go lower. Now the big thing to note, if you look at both of these, when you enter your ship, this is not where you actually can move around. You need to enter into specifically a hab. So if you bring it up, and one thing you'll notice is if you attach to a specific point that has certain requirements. Let's take the cockpit, for example, because we're going to need one of those anyway. The cockpit, if you grab this basic cockpit here, this module at this attachment point on the very top can only have access to weapons. And if I go over to my other category, it's equipment. That is the only two things that can go up here. I'm not going to be able to stick a reactor up here, shield, generator, gravity drive. None of that stuff's going up here. But if I go to the bottom, this is a bit more of a normal connection. And I got cargo, fuel, everything goes underneath this guy. So every part's going to have a little bit of a difference to it, but that's how you're going to learn your limitations, is if you just go to the point, hold your cursor over it and hit attach, you're going to see what's available. Now you can also see from my cockpit, I can do two things. I can either add a structural porthole, which means I would have to put a hab down here, because that means I actually have the ability to enter from below. So that's one way to kind of have your cockpit be a little weird. Or if you want to have kind of a normal entrance, like walk into your cockpit as opposed to going up a ladder, you can just put one connection right there, and that is the key. You need to be able to have some type of hab connect to your cockpit, and you also need to have some type of hab connect to your docker and your landing bay. All the ways that you get into your ship and pilot your ship need to have a hab connected to them, and you need to have your docker and your landing bay have an actual direct path to your cockpit. So you can't have your cockpit like way over here on your ship, and then, you know, they have their own habs, but then you have a bunch of engines in the middle. You have to have a way to walk onto your ship and get to your cockpit. So that has to still be a linear path. So if we want a module, you've got a couple options. You got your basic 1x1, but a lot more options in these 2x1s. I've got all-in-ones, armories, captain's quarters, which has like a bed you can sleep in for an experience boost. You've got a control station, so you've got more crew stations if you need a place for them to be. I've got an infirmary, so it's got like, you know, pharmaceutical lab, living quarters, so I've got more passenger slots, science lab, so I've got research facilities. These are all a little bit different. Workshop, for example. So let's go with the science lab just so you can see it. So now I can take this, attach it to the front. Now I have the ability to get on my ship from space through the docker, from the ground level with the landing bay. Both of them, when I enter the ship, I'm going to walk into this hab right here. I'm going to land in here. I'm either going to be in the front section from the ground floor, or if I come in from space, I'm going to be the back, and I can just walk straight into my cockpit. That's some basics right there already pretty good. Now, the ship is probably going to look like junk when I'm done. That's not the point for aesthetics, but I will show you a few things as we go along. But we've got the basics now. Now, this thing's going to tip over, so let's give it some landing gear. And one way you can check your issues is if you bring up your list of issues. Your errors are the big ones in red. The yellow ones are just things it would be nice for you to have, like weapons and shields and have a little bit more mobility. But the red ones, you cannot actually take off if those don't function. So let's start with landing gear. So landing gear has a specific height to it. So if you go to gear, you're going to see the landing gear is going to need to line up literally with the ground and the landing bay. So whether it's that type of landing gear or that landing gear, whichever one you pick, then you can sit there and duplicate it on the other side. So there are two things of landing gear. Now, that's a little lopsided for me, but the landing gear has specific things to it. It has lander thrust. Now, in different shipyards, there's different type of landing gear for a bunch of different situations. But generally, you'll just need enough landing thrust to be able to get yourself off the platform. So if it says, I'm good, and I don't need specifically any more landing gear, technically this would land. I just have questions about how balanced that would be in real life, but the game physics are going to do what they're going to do. Now, if you want to have a little more reasonable working room, I'm going to go ahead and put on one more hab, just to give us a little space here. And I'm just going to do a little companionway. And then we're going to take our landing gear. I'm going to duplicate it, which is a nice thing to do. Now, if you want to flip the variant or flip the side that it goes on, you can do that as well. But for right now, I've got one that points to the back, one that points to the front. Same thing. Switch it. Now, in my head, that is not going to tip over, and it's not going to be butt heavy. So this is a little more balanced, in my head, at least. So we now have landing gear. Next thing. We need power for anything else we're going to do, so we may as well plop a reactor on here. So a reactor, I'm just going to say we need a decent reactor. You got 18, 20, 23, 26. All these things, when they get up into the power that they can provide, that's how many of those little blue lines that you can, choose to use for weapons or shields or engines or the gravity drive. The gravity drive, in my opinion, only ever needs one, because if you fully power up a gravity drive, you'll jump in 1 second. If you have the gravity drive at like 1 notch out of however many it has, it just takes like an 8-second countdown. So for me, I power up everything in the gravity drive. I give the minimal possible. But to not get too far away from the basic stuff, we'll just use this guy. So that is a basic reactor. So we now have a reactor, we have power. Now we need to be able to jump through the star systems. So let's go ahead and throw on a grav drive. Again, remember when I was telling you how far you can jump in a total distance? That's the fuel tank, we'll do that next. But between one system and another, that is where you might need a bigger gravity drive. Because you'll start with something like this, and the grav jump thrust is 16. That's how far you can go. And then depending on your weight, you might be able to go a little farther. If you're really heavy on your ship, you might actually go a little less. So for now, if you get up to a point where you're going 23, doesn't require any skills, that thing's probably going to function pretty well. Now this looks goofy. We'll figure out some aesthetics here in a second. So we got all that. Now you've got a couple different situations. I'm going to switch these just because I want to be able to have some different places for engines that I want to show you. Okay. So now we're missing engines, and we need one fuel tank. So our gravity drive needs a fuel tank. I'm going to come up here. I'm going to look for fuel tanks. These are the options that will place on top of this. But if I look on the side of maybe my docking bay, I can throw some massive fuel tanks down here on the side. Now, this obviously doesn't fit. But again, if I do pick that, for example, and again, if you ever want to see what every part is possible, just come out here in empty space. And then I can see the most ridiculous things possible and say, okay, this giant helium tank is out here, but that holds 550 grav jump fuel. That would literally get me to the other side of the damn system, but that is a Starship Design rank 3 piece. If I want to be a little more on the reasonable side, this is level 2, and this is level 1. So this is 140. And you'll notice this is a back mount. So the only place this is going to mount is truly the back of the ship. So now I got to see if I have any points back here in the back. It will dock there. I could also tuck it under the ship if I want it underneath down there. That is probably a bad place, and somebody's probably going to figure out the joke that just went through my head for putting 2 round objects on the very back or rear of the ship. But, my apologies for the laugh and the crude humor. All right, too few engines. So we need engines now. Now, and this is where this may not be the best thing. So we're going to delete this. And if I do a healing tank that's just going to land on kind of a side platform, notice how this is a rear landing one. This is on the side, a little smaller, but I can actually put one here. And then if I rotate the ship around, I can just flip it. Now I've got 2. So that's actually going to give me 100. It's going to give me 200 jumping fuel. That's going to be a lot for your early questing and a lot of the stuff you're going to do. Not too many pit stops in between. And it's kind of nice and tucked out of the way between the landing gear. And my docking bay is still good. So I'm using that docking bay nicely. All right. So now we need engines. So you've got engines that can mount in a couple ways. I've got my side mounted engines up here. These are going to be these shape or this shape or the single thruster or the ones that you're used to seeing probably on the Frontier. These are your basic engines you've probably already seen. But you've also got engines that can mount to a rear section like this whole run. Because again, these have no side mounting points. But you'll notice it has a front mounting point. Or I can also mount it if I just want to keep going taller with this ship and look ridiculous. It can go up there. Now technically this thing will take off. Now obviously this looks ridiculous, but that's kind of the point of what I wanted to show you this for, is it doesn't have to look pretty at first. Then when you're like, okay, technically this will fly. Now what else do I possibly want? Well, you probably want some cargo. So let's add cargo and see what this does. Now, the cargo options that I have here are not the best. If I go to a side, I've got way more different cargo options. So it may be one of those things where you, and again, you can flip it. Got a couple different options here. Got a little baby cargo guy. Got a really big cargo guy. And all of this is going to determine the mass. So you'll notice the mass in the bottom corner. Now, if I put this on, my mobility is still really good. Now, it's going to scream at me if I probably do this twice. Let's do this. Flip it and pop it over there. Now the mobility is at 68. That's when it starts giving me a warning. It's going to say low mobility, reduce mass, and add engines to improve mobility. Now, if I add this massive thing on top, my mobility drops down to 33. Now it says I have too few landing gear. Technically, the ship is balanced, but it's like, this is going to crush the landing gear when you try and land. So that's one of the limitations you'll have, is just the quantity of landing gear for the weight that you have. Now, if I take that off, that's just a little reduction in mobility. But if I like everything that's going on there and I just need a little bit more thruster, then I can come down here to, add another back engine. And now, again, it has not enough landing gear. So you kind of get to play this little tinkering game of like, what do I really need versus what I want versus we haven't even gotten to weapons and shields and things like that. But cargo is probably where you're going to play with your weight balance the most. So right now you'll notice I'm like, I just kind of feel like I'm running out of room. I'm a little short. Structural gives you a whole lot of options. So I got to show you this. Bracers are really good. They give you literally a connection point in almost every direction for that reason. But you've also got some cosmetics. Maybe up here, I just want the nose to look a little better. I got this little thing, kind of lines up. And then if I tuck something behind it, like just a basic air bay here for like, a whole section. Now you got a little, minus the giant thing on top, you got a little more smooth nature. You got a couple weapon loading points, that kind of stuff. But the bracer in the back is a really nice thing because so many connection points. So now I can move my landing gear back a little bit. So now let's tinker with the cargo again. So if I go back to cargo and I plop this on there, it's a little heavy. If I put another one on, now I have too few landing gears. But now if I add gear, then we get to the point where still not enough. Try the other side. And hey, we're good again. So now I've got 6 landing gear for the weight that I've got. I've got a massive amount of cargo. My mobility is junk, but we have some functionality. So now if I want to mess with engines again, now let's say I put a white dwarf, this big guy on here, this one. So we're getting there. Let me throw another one on. Now I got 2 arrows. Now I have more weight from landing gear. And also my engines are like off the map. So a lot of it is this little balance of like, what weight do you have versus what balance of things. And that's where like, maybe I move this back down here, move this down here. And it looks a bit more reasonable now, I would say. But again, if I want good mobility, then there we go. Still got 1,700 cargo with just one of those on there. But it just really depends on the shape of the ship that you want. But at this point, let's go with a little more of a reasonable cargo situation. So let's take these 2 side pods and just go with some little cargo things down the side. So I've got a little ballast tank here. All right, no, ballast cargo. Just the little guys, give it a little reasonableness to it. Mobility is still pretty good. I've got 1,200 in cargo, and I got a lot of open space to work with for parts. So the only thing I have left missing technically is a shield. So if I want to put a shield generator, I can either put one up here, I can do one of these little dome ones, but there's some that I don't have access to. As for shields, there's not one that literally pops on the back. But if I'm over here, there's also shield generators that will go side mounted, like this one. You won't be able to normally have access to those, like that guardian generator. You're not going to be able to have the guardian generator up here. So again, remember, different angles are going to have different options. So if you really want to check every single option, come out here and just empty space. And then when you make something, you can see, all right, every stat, every single option, every type of generator that can possibly be here. Maybe I just want to stick with A class for now. What is the best A? That's 715 health. The max power is 7. All right, if I come up here, 760, max power of 7. This one's top mounted, this one's side mounted. But this one gives me a little more for the same amount of power that I would have otherwise. So then if I bring this thing over, I can put it right up here. And now I have a shield generator. Now when it says you have unattached modules, that's just this thing floating out here. If you're ever like feel like it's buried and you can't see it, just double click on your ship and then just move the whole ship, and then you'll probably be able to see the piece that's floating out in space. We're just gonna go ahead and slide this back on, and then it should center up. So final thing is just weapons. And when it comes to weapons, you only have certain points to be able to add weapons. Or do you? This is the fun part, and this is where structural will also come into play. The Nova bracers are nice, but technically the only way to get weapons on a bracer is going to be a horizontal weapon mount specifically. Same thing here. You can add a weapon mount to it. Also, you can add weird little things like wings. Like here's a wing, and you can see it's actually got a bottom and a top section. Well, when I go and zoom in, I can see the only thing going there is equipment and weapons, similar to the way my cockpit works. So if you want weapons on the top and bottom, you just got to make sure they fit, because some of these weapons get to be big, and with that little cargo spot down there, it might not fit. But if you want weapons up top, you can totally do that all day. But one thing you really can do is something called a weapon mount. So if you go to structural, you're going to see this is a giant Nova weapon mount. And then from here, you can add most anything you want to add. Now it's all going to line up together, so if it kind of messes with your head that some things are a little closer together than they should be, that's totally fine. But it's really up to you what you put places. But maybe you want to put a weapon mount up here, and then you got a weapon mount down here. You can really start tinkering with a lot of stuff, but weapons specifically, I'm just going to show you a goofy looking one just to show you it works. So it has unattached modules. All right, what's not attached? That's just this little guy right here. This is the horizontal weapon mount. I'm just going to delete that. So when it comes to weapons, the one thing I'll tell you is, especially early on, your reactor is only going to be able to power so much. So you'll notice my engines have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 power from my engines, because it's 3, 2, and 3. So to get full power out of my engines, I need 8, so that uses up 8 of 20. Then we've got my shields, which are going to use 7. So 8 and 7. So the only thing I've really got left to fully power those 3, I would have to do weapons that require a max of 5. So if you've only got a little bit of power available, it's probably worth getting a couple of weapons that don't require too much power. But maybe it's like a couple of cannons, and that's where it really comes into play. Like, okay, then you're like, do I really need the engine? It has unattached modules because this thing's no longer attached. And let's take off one engine. Still has unattached modules. And this is just one of those things that sometimes happens. Like something will get unattached, and you might have to just move things around and figure out what got stuck or unstuck. So now I'm back at the point where like, well, I probably do need that engine for mobility since it's a little low. So if I duplicate this guy and then flip it, my mobility is good again. So that's where I'm like, okay, I kind of have a limitation right now where I can't have that many weapons. So maybe just look for the best Class A weapon that you can find. It's this one. It's got a big range. I can throw it right on the nose. And then when you have a weapon, it's going to scream at you. You have an unassigned weapon that has to be assigned. So my main weapon is right there. Now you don't need any other weapons besides one. You don't. Nothing else is required. Now you'll also notice, depending on which parts you have, I have a couple spots for weapons that I bet you wouldn't expect. Come right under here, under the landing bay. I got a couple more. So I can put one more beam down here. And if I really want, what I could do is I can duplicate this one underneath, so my weapons are tucked under. And then I can clean up the top of the cockpit, take this off the top, and then up here, if I just want a nice smooth looking ship, I can come right here, add this longer cowling, and then we don't look quite so ridiculous. I mean, I still look a bit top heavy, but we function. So the main ideas behind building a ship are as follows. You need a cockpit, a landing bay, and a docking bay that are connected by some hab. Now you can have all the habs that you want. You can literally go bonkers with those if you feel like it. So like a 3x1 here. And I gotta have a ship that looks like this, and then this, and then this. And you can build your ship around this. And maybe you want to do this and this, and then you maybe put your cockpit somewhere in the middle and you got a whole bunch of random stuff. Right? You can make a goofy looking ship all you want. So don't let anybody tell you how you can build a ship, because I have seen some absolutely crazy ones. But you need to be able to board your ship from space and ground to a hab, and that has to connect to your cockpit. You have to have a path between those. You need to have enough landing gear to be able to manage the weight of your ship. You need to have enough engine thrust so your mobility is reasonable for the weight you have, which typically will come from cargo. You need a gravity drive to be able to jump between systems. You need fuel tanks, so your gravity drive can have fuel, and the more fuel you have between your whatever tanks you have, 2, 3, 12, the farther you can go in one single loading screen. Your reactor is where you're going to get your power from. So if I wanted to take this thing out, and then I wanted a stronger reactor, I'd go look at reactors and say, okay, what's the most juice that I can get out of this thing? Now it's showing 46. That's because I have 2 reactors. So maybe I take that one out. Let me go with one that's got more power. So I've got 26 now. And now when I go, I've got a little more to split between my engines, my shields, and my weapons. And maybe I wanted a second weapon. I probably could do that because we know this is 8 and this is 7, so it's 15. And if I got 26 total power and my equipment power is not even there, I've got 15 plus my 6, then that means I could probably do maybe another weapon of what I have already, one of these electron beams, or maybe I could do something up here. Since I've got 2 spots, I could do a different type. Maybe I do want some missiles. So if I come up top, look for a missile launcher, trying to still stay in A class if possible. And okay, there we go. Missile launcher here, and missile launcher there. So then now I've got another unassigned weapon. We're going to come down here and make sure that's assigned. It's still going to have a warning that I've got 1 missing weapon assignment. But honestly, right now, I'm 26 out of 27. So I'm almost perfect. And that balance is great because I can fully power both. Engine and shields can be basically fully powered. And then when you use your gravity drive, you only need it really just the 1 notch to move around, which I'll show you here in a sec. But all this will work. And again, this is not the smoothest looking ship by any stretch. If I want to put this up here, and then I want a structural piece here that makes things look a little better, maybe I can do something like that to give the brace a little more of an engine brace. And then if I come in here and color things, and we go for a dark burnt orange, like almost brown. And then we'll come here, we'll go with some really light colored accents. On 3, I want bright accents, but on 2, again, I want that almost dark black. So now we get almost more of a utilitarian looking ship with a couple bright colored accents on it. Got my weapons, but I didn't want to color it so you guys could see everything that was on there. So now, if I literally exit, I can build my ship, I can turn around, and I can walk into it. And you can see everything that we just did is live in there. So the weapons are damn near sitting on the ground, but there's about 1 millimeter of clearance, which I kind of love that they're that close. The landing bay right here. So that's where I'm going to walk onto the ship from the ground. This is my space docking module, and since that thing will extend, it will be farther out than the weapons will ever be. So we're clear there. And then you've got your weapons up top. You can see the big giant missile launchers. And then when we get out back, we'll see what it looks like in space. But this is how you board your ship. And again, this is going to go into that 2x1 hab. The only hab that I've got, by the way. And again, if I docked with somebody in space, I would exit through here. I'm going out of the ground floor, going here. So everything's nice and tucked together, which is kind of nice to have. This is my extra bay back here. Nice little connection in case I need it. So you've got these. I've got a pharmaceutical lab here. I've got a research station, and this stuff is just on my ship. It's nice to have with me in case I do want to mess with it. And then here's my cockpit. So I've got the captain's quarters down here, cargo hold, which is probably overflowing right now because my cargo is not balanced for what I used to have on my old ship. But then if we take off, we're kind of good. So if you take off from here, I just wanted to let the takeoff play. But you can literally go into photo mode and you can look at everything that's out here. So you can say we got the engine bracer in the back. That's the landing gear that's tucked up underneath. The helium tanks, the cargo. We got the engine bracer with the missiles up top. All 3 engines on the back. Here's the reactor right here. This is just the bracer for the connections. And I just love the detail on the ships. It's so cool. Like, I should probably tuck something under here so it looks a little more aesthetic. I could put another companion bay or something under there. Shield generator is this guy up top. Remember, that one's up there. And you can literally check out yourself up front, sitting in your cockpit. But also you can check your weapons too. So right now my reactor, I've got a few slots that I can max out. So I've got 1, 2, 3. So my missiles are good, and engines are 9 out of 10. I'm literally like perfect. Max engines, max weapons, max shields. Now, if I want to jump to another system, you can do it one of 2 ways. So you can either go full power, which you'll see takes to almost full power. So if I want to jump to another system, which I know should be safe, if I want to jump to Sol, and I want to jump to Mars, again, there's the fuel consumption. I have the 2 tanks. There's my 200 showing. My jump range is 22, and that thing is 4 light years away. Woohoo, not far. Now, being as my gravity drive is mostly maxed out right now, it's going to go in about 1 second. It's really fast, doesn't take very long at all, you make your jump. Now, the only difference, and why I don't really ever care about powering up my gravity drive, it's just like a me thing. The only reason I would ever power it up more than just one is if I was traveling between a bunch of systems kind of early on in the game, and I wanted to jump from like here to here to here to here to here, and I'd never explored them before, because if you haven't explored somewhere, you need to actually make sure that you have explored all the parts before it. So if you're trying to go between multiple destinations that have places you haven't gone, like here, it's an unexplored route. So I would have to jump all the way to here, and then to here, and then so I could go to here and then to there. But I couldn't just do that one. That's an unexplored route, so I would have to jump to here, because there's something along the route that's unexplored. So outside of those weird moments, you'll notice now that I have my gravity drive set at 1, it's just going to take a little longer to charge up when I head back to New Atlantis. And that's the only difference, which is why I never put it higher than 1. So give it a second. Now it's just going to take an 8-second countdown as the 1. Now if you have like whole bunch of ships that jump into combat or whatever, maybe that's important, but more often than not a big deal to me, and it just takes a little countdown, and that way I know when I get to the other system, my weapons, my shields on my engines are almost fully charged. I'm not really shortchanging myself, so when I get right into space, I'm good to go. Like, my engines, shields, and everything's are good. Now, the difference I'll show you on weapons between full power and low power. So if I go 1 power, they're really slow to charge up. Don't get to use them that often. But if they're at full power, I get to fire them about as fast as it will let me do. I'm just holding down the mouse at this point. Same thing with missiles. So those will sit there and charge up as you use them. And then you'll see the charge up there. It goes 64, then it'll bump up. 71. Takes a little while for them to charge. When you're not using them, it obviously charges a little faster, you see. But if that thing's down here at like 1, that's going to take forever. So that's the difference of how much you power it up, and that's why your reactor is important. But that's also why it's like I would much rather have a little less energy and max shields and run around about like this, with weapons that I know are fast, missiles that I can fire when I need them. And then the cool thing is, if you ever want a really cool photo, you bring up your scanner and then photo mode. If you can bring up photo mode right when you fire, you can actually get a really good view of just about everything coming out. So I've got the lasers up front, I've got the missiles firing out, and you can get some fun photos. But it also will show you, notice how the missiles are stacked, the missile launchers are stacked on the cockpit. The missiles are literally on top of each other where they fire, and they come out accurately. The 2 underneath, when it comes to the two lasers, they're right next to each other and they're parallel right there. So the accuracy of what is in this thing is really, really cool, and I just kind of like what they did with the shipbuilder. But that's the basics of shipbuilding, and I hope this helped you guys out, because from here, you can tinker and make us pretty and go check out all the different vendors and see what the styles are. Maybe you buy a cool ship and now you know how to tinker. The goal is just to show you how all the functions of the systems works, what's important, like the helium tank so you can jump farther, the reactor so you can power up your systems, and then, again, 2 weapons fully powered, probably going to be better off than 3 that are kind of mediocre, and that's a balance of understanding what weapons you want. So if you enjoyed this video, drop a like below. If there was something major I missed, please throw that in the comments. I know this was a longer video, but there's a lot to shipbuilding, so hopefully you learned something in here. If you did, please hit that subscribe button, hit the alert bell. If you want to find me on Twitch or Twitter, it's Ebontis over there. But if you're new to the channel, got more Starfield content and other content that I'm just doing a lot of variety right now, including my usual Destiny stuff. So come hang out at the channel, come hang out on podcasts or Twitch or anything else. Thank you guys for the support lately. The views have been amazing, so I hope you find this one beneficial too. Have a good one, and good luck building your starships.